It is late on the night of August 18, 1944. Paris lies in darkness, lit only by the pale glow of the moon. From a distance, the dull thunder of artillery drifts through the air, each day growing closer, louder, and more menacing. A rigid curfew grips the city. German patrols march endlessly along the deserted boulevards, their boots pounding in rhythm, echoing against the stone walls of narrow alleys. The sound seems to chase away any trace of civilian life. Yet, in the midst of this danger, a small French family hurries across those very streets. The mother clutches a newborn child tightly to her chest. Her husband and their young son carry rolls of blackout curtains to shield their home from prying eyes. They know that one wrong step, one unfortunate encounter, could mean disaster. But the father stays calm, steering them through the maze of back streets with steady confidence, as though he has walked this path 100 times before. Just before they reach the final corner, fate intervenes. The boy stumbles over a loose cobblestone, the noise snapping through the silence like a shot. The family freezes, hearts pound in their chests. They know they have only seconds to recover. Quickly, the mother steadies her son, and with no time to waste, the three of them dash off into the darkness, deeper into the twisting passages of their occupied city. This scene, both ordinary and extraordinary, was the reality of life in German-occupied France. It captures the fear, the vigilance, and the quiet defiance that shaped everyday existence under Nazi rule. In this video, we will step into that world. We will explore what daily life was like for the people of France after their nation's surrender during the Second World War. We will look at the hardships, the humiliations, and the constant tension of living under a regime that saw France not as a proud country, but as a resource to be exploited. This is the story of life in German-occupied France. After the French surrender on June 22, 1940, the nation was carved in two. To the north, including Paris, lay the German-occupied zone. To the south, a collaborationist puppet state was established under Marshal Philippe Pétain, based in the spa town of Vichy. The division reflected German priorities. The Reich did not have the manpower or the interest to govern all of France directly, so they relied on French administrators to manage what they could. Italy, having played only a limited role in the conquest, was rewarded with its own small zone of occupation, a symbolic gesture rather than a strategic necessity. From the moment the armistice was signed, a shadow fell across France. Even the passage of time was disrupted. German authorities ordered the French clocks move forward by 1 hour, aligning with Berlin time. This meant mornings were darker, and nights arrived sooner. It was a subtle but constant reminder of foreign domination, altering even the rhythm of daily life. Soon after, strict regulations rolled in. Citizens were forbidden from hiding weapons, from helping escaped prisoners of war, or from listening to foreign broadcasts. Only German-approved radio stations were allowed. Perhaps most ominous was the sweeping ban on showing hostility toward the occupiers. This vague clause gave German soldiers and officials nearly unlimited authority, free to punish dissent with brutal efficiency. Paris itself was quickly flooded with thousands of German troops. Soldiers on leave crowded its boulevards, while its most famous hotels were seized and converted into headquarters for the military and Nazi administrators. To Parisians, the sight of young, eager Wehrmacht recruits enjoying the pleasures of their capital was deeply humiliating. But the occupation came with further insult. The exchange rate between the franc and the German Reichsmark was fixed at 20-1. Even the lowest-ranking German private suddenly found himself wealthy by French standards. For many soldiers, it meant the chance to buy up wine, cheese, and other delicacies in quantities they could never afford at home. Officers went further, openly requisitioning vast amounts of supplies, from fine clothing and luxury foods to priceless works of art. Trains rolled out of France every day, weighed down not with troops but with plunder. As infuriating as this looting was, the French soon found themselves subject to even harsher restrictions. A nationwide curfew was imposed, banning all activity between midnight and 6 in the morning. Each time an act of resistance took place, the curfew was pushed earlier, strangling what little freedom the population still had. It was a weapon of control as much as a safety measure. By limiting movement at night, the Germans hoped to crush the spirit of rebellion before it could spread. Yet the real suffering came not just from curfews or looting, but from the growing demands of the German war machine. As the Second World War dragged on and Nazi supply lines grew thin, the Reich leaned heavily on its occupied territories to make up the shortfall. At first, France was stripped of luxury goods, but soon It was the essentials that were taken: metal, textiles, leather, fuel, and food. Rationing was introduced early, and by 1941 the restrictions were severe. The average adult French citizen received between 12 and 1,500 calories per day. Before the war, that number had been closer to 2,400. By comparison, the average German citizen in 1941 was still receiving about 2,000 calories. Malnutrition and hunger became daily realities in occupied France. Where there is rationing, there is inevitably a black market. Across France, hidden networks emerged where food and goods could be traded, if one was willing to pay the steep price. Farmers risked heavy fines or imprisonment if caught selling outside official channels, but many considered it worth the danger. Goods sold through the black market could fetch prices 30 times higher than the government rate. Entire barter systems grew between cities and rural villages, allowing desperate people to secure enough to survive. These underground economies became lifelines, sustaining millions through years of scarcity. The strain of occupation was not limited to hunger. Families were torn apart on a massive scale. Nearly 2 million French soldiers captured during the 1940 campaign remained in German prison camps. The armistice explicitly stated that Germany was under no obligation to release them. They became hostages, bargaining chips the Nazis used to ensure compliance. Meanwhile, the collapse of the French army and the partition of the country displaced millions. Villages were emptied, cities like Paris lost huge portions of their populations, and the once thriving capital saw its 3 million residents shrink to barely 800,000. As the war dragged on, Germany's hunger for labor grew insatiable. With more German men drafted to fight, the Reich looked to occupied lands to fill its factories. At first, propaganda tried to convince the French to volunteer. Posters showed smiling workers building airplanes or assembling machines, promising good wages and an honorable contribution to Europe's future. Few were persuaded. In 1942, Hitler appointed Fritz Sauckel as general plenipotentiary for labor deployment. Sauckel quickly became infamous as the slave master of Europe. His mission was simple: deliver foreign workers to German industry by any means necessary. The first major program was called the Relève, or relief shift. For every 3 French workers sent to Germany, 1 French prisoner of war would be released. The Vichy government hailed this as a noble compromise, even presenting it as a patriotic duty. Propaganda reframed the program as a sacrifice made for the sake of French families. By working in German factories, one could bring soldiers home. In truth, it was coerced servitude. By the end of 1942, about 250,000 French workers had been sent east. It was far short of the quotas demanded, and Sauckel pressed for harsher measures. In February 1943, the Vichy regime bowed to pressure and introduced the compulsory work service, known as the STO. Under its rules, all healthy men between 18 and 50 and unmarried women between 21 and 35 could be forced into any work deemed necessary. There was no disguising what this was. It was forced labor, slave labor on a national scale. For many French citizens, this was the breaking point. They had endured hunger, humiliation, and displacement, but the thought of being shipped to Germany to labor for their oppressors was intolerable. Resistance swelled dramatically. Thousands of young men and women fled to the countryside, evading German patrols and Vichy police. They formed armed bands called the Maquis, named after the wild, scrub-covered terrain of Corsica. The French countryside offered cover for guerrilla activity, but it also drew brutal retaliation. Entire rural communities became battlegrounds. Farmers, villagers, even children found themselves caught between the Maquis and the occupying forces. German policy toward resistance was merciless. From the very beginning, reprisals followed the principle of collective punishment. If a suspected partisan was caught, their family could be executed. As the years passed, these reprisals grew increasingly indiscriminate. Entire villages were massacred, their populations wiped out as warnings to others. By 1944, France was dotted with the graves of the murdered, and places like Oradour-sur-Glane would remain scarred forever as symbols of the occupation's cruelty. Adding to the tragedy was the role of French collaborators. The Milice, a paramilitary force loyal to Vichy, worked alongside the Germans to suppress their own countrymen. Some of its members were hardline fascists who had been active before the war, but many joined out of desperation, lured by the promise of better rations or exemption from forced labor. The Milice became infamous for its brutality, carrying out arrests, torture, and executions. The information they extracted from prisoners often led directly to German massacres. These acts of betrayal would not be forgotten. By the summer of 1944, the grip of the occupiers began to falter. On June 6, the Allied landings in Normandy opened a new front, and French resistance fighters played a vital role in disrupting German supply lines and communications. Just weeks later, Operation Dragoon in the south forced the Germans into retreat. In Paris, the resistance rose in open rebellion. At first, they had fewer than 100 weapons, but as the fighting intensified, they captured German rifles, machine guns, even tanks. The city erupted in chaos. Barricades went up in the streets, and crowds of Parisians joined the fight. When word of the uprising reached the Allies, a free French armored division rushed to the capital. Faced with the inevitability of defeat, the German governor surrendered. Paris was free. Liberation brought both joy and vengeance. The French people, who had suffered 4 long years under occupation, now turned their anger toward collaborators. Roughly 10,000 individuals were killed in reprisals, some through formal trials, others at the hands of furious mobs. A broader wave of prosecutions, known as the Legal Purge, followed. Ironically, many collaborators who survived the chaos were interned in concentration camps, some of which had been built earlier by Vichy itself. But liberation did not erase the scars. Allied bombing campaigns had devastated French infrastructure, leaving cities in ruins. Around 150,000 civilians had died during the occupation. Of these, roughly 30,000 were executed by the Germans for resisting or defying their rule. Another 60,000 had taken up arms with the resistance and paid with their lives. And yet, despite everything, the spirit of the French people endured. Most resisted in quiet ways, through small acts of defiance, through enduring hunger without surrender, through refusing to give legitimacy to their occupiers. Only a minority sought comfort through collaboration. In the years that followed, France would rebuild. It would rise again as a leading nation in Europe, a founding member of NATO, and a cornerstone of the Western Alliance. But the memory of occupation remained. One need only walk the silent streets of Oradour-sur-Glane, left in ruins as a memorial, to feel the weight of that dark chapter. Life in German-occupied France was marked by fear and loss, but also by resilience. In the end, it was that resilience that allowed the nation to endure, to resist, and to reclaim its freedom.